So welcome back to Unit 7 Cognition. We are on Module 33, Forgetting Memory Construction and Improving Memory, all things that are really important topics. This is a pretty long module, and there are quite a few learning targets from the textbook. And remember, if you're just joining in on these recordings, this lecture and the slides go along with Myers Psychology for the AP course 3rd edition. Okay, so the learning targets for this module. You should be able to do these things at the end of reading the chapter, reading the module, and listening to these slides. Explain why we forget. Discuss how misinformation, imagination, and source amnesia influence our memory construction. And describe how we decide whether a memory is real or false. Analyze why reports of repressed memory and recovered memories have been so hotly debated for decades. Describe the reliability of young children's eyewitness descriptions, and discuss how you can use memory research to do better in this course and other courses. So William James, one of my favorites, quote from 1890, "If we remembered everything, we should on most occasions be as ill off as if we remembered nothing." So it's interesting to think about that there's an important component of us being able to forget things, right? Remembering everything could be very problematic, although most of us wish that our memories would be better. There is something to be said for the ability to forget. And up next is a woman who's really interesting, and she is one of several people that have unbelievable autobiographical memory. Her name is Jill Price, and she remembers every day of her life since the age of 14 with detailed clarity, including both the joys and the hurts. She has a very detailed episodic long-term memory, and this is very rare, but there are some others. Actress Mary Lou Henner, if you've ever heard of her, and some others were actually interviewed for, I think it was either 2020 or Nightline or Dateline or something like that. You can find it on YouTube. It's about people that have these unbelievable autobiographical memories, and it's fascinating. You can give them any sort of date from decades ago, and they can sort of just see what was happening. They can see what they were doing, what they had for lunch, that sort of thing. Whereas I struggle to remember what I had for lunch yesterday. Okay, let's pause for another quote. And this one from Jill Price, who was just shown on the earlier picture. "Whenever I see a date flash on the television, or anywhere for that matter, I automatically go back to that day and remember where I was, what I was doing, what day it fell on, and on and on and on. And it's nonstop, uncontrollable, and totally exhausting." So she's saying that while many of us would look at this ability with awe, that there are some definite negative aspects to be able to just see every single date of your life and go back to the same feelings you had. Think about bad days you had or traumatic experiences. Pulling up a particular date would draw her right back into that, those emotions. So HM is one of the most famous case studies in all of psychology. His name, Henry Molaison, which we know now, but for decades he was called HM, had much of his hippocampus removed in order to stop persistent seizures. This resulted in severe disconnection of the remaining hippocampus from the rest of the brain. For the rest of his life, Molaison was unable to form new conscious memories. For about half a minute, he could keep something in mind, enough to carry on a conversation. When distracted, he would lose what was just said or what had just occurred. So you can imagine this was debilitating, right? And his brain has been studied and studied and studied for decades. Although it was studied throughout his life, scientists at UC San Diego's Brain Observatory are preserving Henry Molaison's brain for the benefit of future brain studies, because what we can learn from his brain is really, really important to understand memory and the connections within our brains that are really, really important for us to form those new memories. So when we think about forgetting, what are the two types of forgetting? We've got anterograde versus retrograde amnesia. Anterograde is an inability to form new memories due to illness or injury, as with HM, who I just mentioned. He could recall his past before he had the surgery, but he could not make new memories. Retrograde amnesia, on the other hand, is an inability to retrieve information from one's past due to injury or illness. So when do we forget? Some of us might be more than others. Forgetting can occur at any memory stage: encoding, storage, or retrieval. So let's think about, when we're thinking about memory, we should be thinking about getting that information in, encoding it, storing it, how we organize it inside once it's in there, and retrieving it, how we can get it back out. And the forgetting can occur at any of those stages. When we process information, we filter, alter, or lose much of it. So this is the little graphic that shows the sensory memory. The sensors momentarily register amazing amounts of detail, right? Our sensory memory, like our echoic and iconic memory, they can take in a ton of information. Working memory, though, kind of is a little bit of sort of a buzzkill. We can't hold that much in our working memory. A few items are both noticed and encoded, and then it goes into our long-term memory where some items are altered or lost. And then retrieval is really interesting. Even if it's in our long-term memory, we need to have those cues to be able to get it back out. We need to have to understand how to retrieve it from our long-term memory for us to actually get it back to our conscious awareness. So again, encoding, storage, and retrieval failures. These are the reasons why we forget. Encoding failures, what are they? Well, much of what we sense, we never notice. And what we fail to encode, we will never remember, right? Like if we're not attending to it and noticing it, we will not encode it, and then we will never get it into our memories to be able to retrieve back out. As simple as that. How about storage decay? So after learning lists of nonsense syllables, a famous psychologist, Ebbinghaus, studied how much he retained up to 30 days later. He found that memory for novel information fades quickly and then levels it out. This is known as Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve. Okay? This is an important visual to understand. So we immediately don't remember quite a bit. And then sort of what we don't remember levels off over time. So it's important to learn it at that immediate time. So when we try not to forget just a few days after the learning, if we utilize all those study techniques we know of to alleviate some of our forgetting, it can be really good for the long term. What research has been conducted on the forgetting curve that Ebbinghaus came up with? Well, Harry Baric in 1984 found a similar forgetting curve for Spanish vocabulary learned in school. Compared with those just completing a high school or college Spanish course, people 3 years out of school had forgotten much of what they had learned. How about retrieval failure, that third type of failure? Often forgetting is not memories faded, right? It's not that, it's just no longer in there, but it's just that we can't get to them. We can't figure out how to retrieve them. We store in long-term memory what's important to us or what we've rehearsed, but sometimes important events defy our attempts to access them. I feel like this happens to me all the time. I know it's in there somewhere, but I'm not figuring out the cues to get that information back out. So what are two factors that influence memory retrieval errors? So we've got proactive and retroactive interference. For some reason, those sound like, it sounds like football terminology or something. So proactive interference, the forward-acting disruptive effect of older learning on the recall of new information, okay? So the old stuff you learned last month is getting in the way of the new stuff you're trying to remember. Whereas retroactive interference is the backward-acting disruptive effect of newer learning on the recall of old information. So they're sort of the opposite of each other. So the new stuff you learned this week is making it hard to remember the stuff you learned a few months ago. Those are confusing terms, so make sure you have them clear. Some examples, and sorry, my dog is walking right underneath my desk at the moment. If you buy a new combination lock, your well-rehearsed old combination may interfere with your retrieval of the new one. I actually have had this exact thing happen to me with bike locks. Retroactive interference, on the other hand, an example would be if someone sings new lyrics to the tune of an old song, you may have trouble remembering the original words. Again, have had that actual experience. Okay, what are some other examples? Proactive, you changed your email password last week, but you still keep typing in the old password. I'm sure many of you have felt that. Your teacher gives you a cumulative exam covering all 10 chapters from the first semester, but you can only recall the more recent material, not the chapters from the beginning of school. That would be more of an example of retroactive interference. So what does the research say in this area? Information presented in the hour before sleep suffers less retroactive interference because the opportunity for interfering events is minimized. So that's really, really interesting, right? That presenting it information right before sleep allows us to have less retroactive interference. How about this concept of motivated forgetting? So memory is an unreliable, self-serving historian. It's a really good quote there because it's very true. Sigmund Freud suggested that people may forget unwanted memories either consciously or unconsciously. In other words, they may be motivated to forget. Forgetting may be in people's best interest sometimes. So consider this study. Researchers told some participants, but not others, about the benefits of frequent toothbrushing. Those individuals informed about the benefits of toothbrushing then recalled more than others did, having frequently brushed their teeth in the preceding 2 weeks. So Freud also came up with a concept called repression. He proposed that forgetting may be due to repression, which is a defense mechanism, the basic defense mechanism that banishes from consciousness anxiety-arousing thoughts, feelings, and memories. This was a big part of Freudian psychology, that a lot of what people were doing was repressing memories because they didn't like the way they felt. They were anxiety-causing. They were feelings and memories that people did not want to bring into conscious awareness. But Freud may not have been exactly right. And Margaret McKinnon would disagree. As a psychologist, she interviewed 15 passengers who nearly died in a plane crash and found that all exhibited vivid, detailed memories, not the repression of highly emotional, arousing memories. With trauma comes not repression, is what most psychologists have found, but far more often robust memories. Instead of repressing, we actually remember it in more vivid detail. So there's a concept called reconsolidation, which is a process in which previously stored memories, when retrieved, are potentially altered before being stored again. And this is a really interesting thing to think about right here. In terms of our memories, they're like Wikipedia pages. If you know about Wikipedia, which probably most of you do, they're capable of continuous revision. When we replay a memory, we often replace the original with a slightly modified version, rather like what happens in the telephone game, if you've ever played that, as a whispered message gets progressively altered when passed from person to person. So we actually just talked about this in my own class, and some of the students were really disturbed by this, right? Because we like to think of our memories as being so accurate, to think that we are continuously altering, like a Wikipedia page, our memories, that we're continuously revising it and slightly modifying it over time is a little bit alarming and probably goes against what you generally think about your own memory. Even more alarming is some of the research by probably the most prominent memory researcher in all of psychology, Elizabeth Loftus. The misinformation effect occurs when misleading information has distorted one's memory of an event. Elizabeth Loftus demonstrated that when exposed to subtle misleading information, people may misremember. So how did she study this effect? So she had 2 groups of people watch a film clip of a traffic accident, and then they had to answer questions about what they had seen. So she utilized some what would be called leading questions. Those asked about how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other, gave higher speed estimates, statistically significantly higher speed estimates than those asked about how fast the cars were going when they hit each other. So what she found was just the one word being changed had an effect on the speed estimates that the witnesses actually reported. And then there was the complete misinformation. 1 week later, when asked whether the witnesses recalled seeing any broken glass, people had heard smashed were more than 2 times as likely to report seeing glass fragments. And in fact, there was no glass at all. There was no broken glass. And they still reported it based on the leading words that were used. So an interesting thing to think about is, how does our imagination impact our memories? Repeatedly imagining non-existent actions and events can create false memories. Think about that. So us just imagining non-existing events and activities can create memories that actually didn't happen. So misinformation and imagination effects occur partly because visualizing something and actually perceiving it, we learned this in our biological basis of behavior unit, they actually activate similar brain areas. Imagined events also later seem more familiar, and familiar things seem more real. The more vividly we can imagine things, the more likely they are to become memories. So really fascinating in terms of imagination and how that has an effect on what we are thinking is our actual memory. How can digitally altered photographs produce imagination inflation? So when Slate magazine readers in 2012 were shown a doctored photo of President Obama and Iranian President Ahmadinejad shaking hands, 26% recalled the event, despite it being fake. It had never happened. It was a doctored photo. And because people had seen it, they remembered it as being an event that actually happened. So you can see how the influence of technology and the ability to create photos that aren't real can have a strange and alarming effect on our memories. So getting back to amnesia, what about source amnesia? It's faulty memory for how, when, or where information was learned or imagined. It's also called source misattribution. We misattribute where the information is coming from. It tends to affect a person's explicit memory, and along with the misinformation effect, is at the heart of many false memories. So what are some examples of source amnesia? So we may recognize someone, but have no idea where we've seen this person. Happens to me all the time. We may tell a friend some gossip only to learn we got the news from that friend. That happens to me more than my own family. A friend tells you about an internet story about the woman who had 75 cats. You know you've heard the story before, but you're not exactly what the source was. You can't remember where you heard this story. So this example, preschoolers interacted with Mr. Science, who engaged in activities such as blowing up a balloon with baking soda and vinegar. 3 months later, on 3 successive days, their parents read them a story describing some things children had experienced with Mr. Science and some they had not. So what were the results of this? When a new interviewer asked what Mr. Science had done with them, like, did Mr. Science have a machine with ropes to pull? 4 in 10 children spontaneously recalled him doing things that had only happened in the story. They recalled, they pulled from their memory what they thought was real, but it was actually something that was a false memory. So deja vu, how many of you experienced this or have experienced this? It happens to me quite a bit. It's that eerie sense of thinking, man, I have definitely been here or done this or been in this situation before. I've experienced this before. So cues from the current situation may somehow unconsciously trigger retrieval of an earlier experience. Source amnesia is one possible explanation for this phenomenon. So we know how fallible our memories can be. So how can we tell our true memories from ones that we've constructed? It's tough. I look back on my childhood and I struggle to figure out, you know, are these real memories that I remember, or is it because someone's talked to me about them, or is it because over time I've, you know, become like a living, breathing Wikipedia page that I've slightly modified things that I remember over time, and now it's a completely different memory. False memories can be persistent and they can feel like real ones. We more easily remember the gist than the events themselves. I totally have this happen all the time, right? I can remember kind of what happened, but when I try to think about the details, it's really, really hard. And it's easy to kind of make them up. And then if I kind of like fill in the gaps at one point when I'm telling a story about what happened in my past, later on, I might pull up sort of those details that I filled in, right? So we're kind of rewriting and changing our memories over time. So the repression of memories is hotly debated. The debate between memory researchers and some therapists focuses on whether memories of early childhood abuse are repressed and can be recovered during therapy. There was a lot of this uncovering of repressed memories happening, especially in the 1980s and the early 1990s. A lot of therapists were realizing, having people come in that were having different difficulties in their lives, and they were, you know, coming to the conclusion that these adults had been somehow abused and their memories had been repressed over time. And it became really controversial, and a lot of memory researchers have said this is not accurate. It's very unlikely that they repressed memories. Professional organizations seek to find common ground between the potential for doubting true accusations of abuse, which are of course very important. We want to make sure that those are being looked at accurately, and the potential for false accusations, which happened a lot, and people getting falsely accused and imprisoned for things that actually didn't happen, just based on the testimony of repressed memories. So can memories of child abuse be reconstructed? So here's a little graphic. Innocent people are falsely accused as therapists prompt, right? They put some leading kind of ideas into the brains, memories of clients coming in. Victims of sexual abuse often have your symptoms. So maybe you were abused and repressed the memory. Let's see if I can help you recover the memory by digging back and visualizing your trauma. So, you know, that could be a well-intentioned therapist really trying to help a client, but you could see how that could lead to the visualization of trauma that may have never happened. So the misinformation effect in source amnesia, adult client may form images of a threatening person. With rehearsal, sort of repeated therapy sessions, the image grows more vivid. The client then becomes stunned, angry, and ready to confront or sue the remembered abuser. The accused person is then like confused. The accused person is confused or stunned and denies the long ago accusation, right? We've seen this play out over and over again. And, you know, like I said, the well-meaning therapist is trying to help, but the misinformation effect and the rehearsal of the incorrect information can lead to false accusations of child abuse. So what are 3 arguments against repression of child abuse memories? So many psychologists question whether repression actually even occurs. So it is a very controversial idea, repression, even though many of us think, oh, of course we repress things because we've heard about it in the popular culture. Within psychology, it's questionable whether repression actually occurs. Traumatic experiences typically lead to vivid, persistent, haunting memories rather than anything like repression. When memories are recovered after long periods of amnesia, particularly when extraordinary means were used to secure the recovery of memory, there's a high probability that the memories are false. So what do psychologists agree on in this area? So of course, they agree that sexual abuse happens, injustice happens, and forgetting happens. Recovered memories are commonplace. Memories of things that happened before age 4 are very unreliable. Think about that term we learned, infantile amnesia. Memories recovered under hypnosis are especially unreliable, and memories, whether real or false, doesn't matter if they actually happened or they didn't, they can actually be very, very emotionally upsetting. So related to this, how reliable are young children's eyewitness descriptions? If memories can be sincere, yet sincerely wrong, how can jurors decide cases in which children's memories of sexual abuse are the only evidence? So the research in this area, what has been done? Stephen Ceci and Maggie Brooks' studies of children's memories have made them aware of how easily children's memories can be molded, shaped. For example, they asked 3-year-olds to show on an anatomically correct doll where a pediatrician had touched them. Of the children who had not received genital examinations, 55% pointed to either genital or anal areas. So that's really alarming, right? So over half of the children said that the pediatricians had touched them in places that hadn't actually happened. So in one analysis of eyewitness data from over 20,000 participants, children regularly identified innocent suspects as guilty. The research leads me to worry about the possibility of false allegations. It is not a tribute to one's scientific integrity to walk down the middle of the road if the data are more to one side. This is what Stephen Ceci said. Okay, so knowing what thinking about all the stuff we went over, how can we use memory research to do better on your courses? So there's lots of information from memory that's sort of summed up on this one slide here from memory research. The findings suggest that the following strategies can help improve your memory. Study repeatedly. That doesn't mean read. It means study repeatedly in different ways. Make the material meaningful. Make it meaningful to your own life. Connect it to something you already know. Making it meaningful can be one of the best ways to activate, in connections within your brain. Activate retrieval cues. So much research going on right now about the importance of retrieval practice, continually testing yourself, not like high stakes testing, but just doing things like utilizing Quizlet, creating your own quizzes, using information, the quizzes that are in your textbook to make sure that you're actually understanding what you're reading, using mnemonic devices, minimize interference as much as possible when you're studying. This next one's really important and one we all struggle with sometimes. Sleep more, right? Sleep is really important for your learning. Test yourself again. Be sure you can retrieve as well as recognize the material. So we just went over a lot. Let's explain why we forget. Well, we've got these two different types of amnesia. Anterograde is an inability to form new memories due to injury or illness, whereas retrograde is an inability to retrieve old memories due to injury or illness. Normal forgetting happens because we have never encoded the information, because the information is decayed, or because we can't figure out how to get back out. We can't retrieve it. We don't know. We may have encoded and stored it, but we don't know how to access it. Retrieval problems may result from proactive interference, prior learning, or from retroactive interference, new learning disrupting old information. Some people believe that motivated forgetting occurs, but researchers have found little evidence for repression. Sorry, Freud. Okay, let's think about this next learning target. Discuss how misinformation, imagination, and source amnesia influence our memory construction. And describe how we decide whether a memory is real or false. So repeatedly replaying memories may alter them. Think about that Wikipedia page, leading to the introduction of inaccuracies, a process called reconsolidation. In experiments demonstrating the misinformation effect, people have formed false memories by incorporating misleading details, either after receiving wrong information or even just repeatedly imagining and rehearsing something that never happened. When we reassemble a memory during retrieval, we may attribute it to the wrong source, which is called source amnesia. Source amnesia may help explain the phenomenon most of us have probably had happen in our lives, deja vu. False memories can feel really, really real, like real memories, and they can be persistent, but they are usually limited to the main gist of the event. Okay, analyze why reports of repressed and recovered memories have been so hotly debated. The debate focuses on whether memories of early abuse can be repressed and then be recovered in therapy. This is very controversial. Professional organizations still are seeking to find common ground between the potential for doubting true accusations of abuse and the potential for false accusations. Psychologists agree on these 7 things. Sexual abuse does happen. Injustice happens, people being falsely accused. Forgetting happens. Recovered memories are commonplace. Memories of things that happened before age 4 are unreliable. Recovered memories under hypnosis are especially unreliable. And memories, whether real or false, can be emotionally upsetting. How about the reliability of young children's eyewitness testimony? Children are very susceptible to the misinformation effect. But if they're questioned in neutral ways, not those leading ways, they understand they can accurately recall events and the people involved in them. And finally, how can you use your memory? How can you use the findings from memory research to do better in your academic courses? There are so many ways. So memory research findings suggest the following strategies: study repeatedly, make the information meaningful, activate those retrieval cues, use mnemonic devices, minimize interference when you're studying, sleep more, and test yourself. Practice your retrieval of information over and over again. Okay, thank you for listening. Take care.